Welcome to WebLizard Lab's Cert Lab. This is SC-500 practice questions, Azure Governance, Policy, and RBAC. You will work through 20 questions covering policy definitions and assignments, security standards and recommendations, management locks, custom roles, Azure RBAC scope, and governance protections. Listen for the scope, permission boundary, control plane, and enforcement mechanism that decides each answer. You will hear each complete scenario and every answer choice. 3 questions require more than one answer and are identified as Select 2. After the cue, lock in your answer. There is a true 3-second silence. The answer then resolves in place before the reasoning canvas explains the decisive distinction. Pause whenever you want additional thinking time. Question 1. A governance team wants to apply an existing Azure policy rule that Microsoft provides and maintains. The team does not want to author its own JSON rule. Which policy component should it select? A. A built-in policy definition. B. A custom policy definition. C. A policy initiative. D. A policy assignment. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A, a built-in policy definition. Microsoft provides and maintains built-in policy definitions. A custom definition is customer-created, an initiative groups definitions, and an assignment applies a definition or initiative to a scope. Question 2. A compliance control can be assessed automatically. Defender for Cloud completes its assessment and finds that an in-scope resource does not satisfy the control. How will Defender for Cloud classify the resource for that control? A. Exempted, pending a response from the resource owner. B. Non-compliant with the assessed control. C. Compliant with an informational observation. D. Not assessed because the control is automated. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B, non-compliant with the assessed control. Defender for Cloud continually assesses controls that can be assessed automatically and reports in-scope resources as compliant or non-compliant. Because the assessed resource does not satisfy this control, its result is non-compliant. Question 3. Your organization configures a Microsoft Defender for Cloud security policy for Azure, AWS, and GCP resources. Defender for Cloud evaluates a resource and finds that it does not meet a defined control. Which 2 statements describe what occurs at the security standard and recommendation layers? Select 2 answers. A. A security standard supplies the controls and assessment logic applied to the environment. B. A security recommendation describes the failed issue and the actions required to remediate it. C. A security recommendation defines the standards, controls, and conditions used to assess every resource. D. A failed control changes the risk priority of an existing recommendation instead of generating remediation guidance. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and B. A. A security standard supplies the controls and assessment logic applied to the environment. B. A security recommendation describes the failed issue and the actions required to remediate it. A and B are correct. A security policy includes security standards, and those standards define the controls and assessment logic applied to the environment. When a resource fails a defined control, Defender for Cloud generates a recommendation that describes the issue and the actions required for remediation. Question 4. A security team must be able to create and delete management locks for resources in RG regulated. The team must not manage role assignments or receive unrelated Microsoft Organ permissions. You will assign a custom role at the RG regulated scope. Which actions entry provides the required lock permissions with the least privilege? A. Microsoft chargements/star. B. Microsoft armor/locks/star. C. Microsoft Celid/star. D. Microsoft bSign. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Microsoft/.ridelocks/star. Microsoft.locks/star matches the management lock operation family and is documented as sufficient to create or delete management locks. Assigned at RG-regulated, the role applies to that resource set. It avoids both the unrelated role assignments family and the broader Microsoft.ridelock wildcard. Question 5. An administrator is creating one Azure role assignment for an operations analyst. The assignment must define the boundary of Azure resources governed by the granted access. Which role assignment field establishes that boundary? A. The selected security principal. B. The selected role definition. C. The selected assignment scope. D. The assignment description. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. The selected assignment scope. Every Azure role assignment must specify a scope. The scope identifies the set of Azure resources to which the assignment's granted access applies. Question 6. A directory operations team must manage selected app registration and enterprise application settings in Microsoft Entra ID. The team will not manage subscriptions, resource groups, or other Azure resources. Which custom role design fits the governed resource layer? A. Create a Microsoft Entra custom role that contains the required permissions that are enabled for custom use. B. Create an Azure custom role and place Microsoft Graph directory permissions in its Actions collection. C. Create a Microsoft Entra custom role and add any Microsoft Graph permission requested by the team. D. Create a Microsoft Entra custom role and add Azure Resource Provider operations to the same role definition. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Create a Microsoft Entra custom role that contains the required permissions that are enabled for custom use. A is correct. The governed objects are Microsoft Entra resources, so the role belongs in the Microsoft Entra custom role system. The role may include only permissions that are enabled for custom use. App registrations and enterprise applications are documented permission categories for this system. Question 7. An emergency access group was assigned the User Access Administrator role directly at the Contoso Prod subscription. The assignment now appears as inherited on the Payments Resource Group. A security engineer must remove only this assignment and already has Microsoft/role assignments/delete at the subscription. At which scope should the engineer open Access Control, IAM, and remove the assignment? A. The Payments Resource Group. B. The Contoso Prod subscription. C. Each individual resource in payments. D. The Tenant Root Management Group. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. The Contoso Prod subscription. An inherited Azure RBAC assignment cannot be removed at a child scope. The engineer must open Access Control, IAM, at the scope where the role was assigned, the Contoso Prod subscription. The scenario also confirms that the engineer already has the required role assignments delete permission there. Question 8. A backup operator needs protection against accidental or malicious deletion of Azure backup data. Which two outcomes are provided by soft delete? Select two answers. A. It requires a separate resource guard owner to authorize critical operations. B. It delays permanent deletion of backup data. C. It makes the vault setting irreversible by using worm storage. D. It permits recovery of deleted backup data during the configured retention period. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B and D. B. It delays permanent deletion of backup data. D. It permits recovery of deleted backup data during the configured retention period. Soft delete delays permanent deletion and retains deleted backup data for the configured retention period, creating an opportunity to recover it during that window. Question 9. An Azure-hosted application deployed with Bicep reads blobs from an Azure storage account. The application service supports Microsoft Entra authentication. The team wants to minimize credential rotation and keep reusable deployment artifacts independent of application credentials. Which authentication design should you implement? A. Enable a managed identity for the application and assign it the required storage data plane role. B. Create an app registration with a client secret. Store the secret in Key Vault and configure the application with a Key Vault reference. C. Create an app registration with a certificate. Store the certificate in Key Vault and configure the application to use it. D. Retrieve a storage account key during deployment and pass it to the application through an @secure module parameter. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Enable a managed identity for the application and assign it the required storage data plane role. A is correct. Managed identities enable Azure resources to authenticate and be authorized to access other Azure resources without the team handling or managing credentials. That directly meets the requirement to avoid application credentials in reusable deployment artifacts. Question 10. A policy definition is assigned to subscription sub 1. Resource group RG Lab is configured as an excluded subscope of the assignment. Which scope behavior should the security team expect? A. The assignment applies only to the sub 1 resource object, not to resources beneath it. B. The assignment applies through sub 1 and its subordinate scopes, except for RG Lab and the resources in that excluded subscope. C. The assignment applies through sub 1 and also enforces the policy in RG Lab despite the exclusion. D. A separate assignment is required for every resource group in sub 1 before any resources are covered. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. The assignment applies through sub 1 and its subordinate scopes, except for RG Lab and the resources in that excluded subscope. A policy assignment applies to the resources within its resource manager scope, and subscopes can be excluded. Therefore, the subscription assignment reaches subordinate resources, while the excluded resource group subscope is omitted. You've completed 10 questions. Take a moment to reset your attention. In the remaining questions, keep separating policy definitions from assignments, role permissions from scope, and governance enforcement from resource authorization. Question 11. A governance team must configure and assign a compliance standard. After assignment, the security operations team wants enhanced visualization, progress tracking, and read-only access to the standard's details. Which portal allocation is correct? A. Configure and assign the standard in the Azure portal. Monitor it and view read-only details in the Defender portal. B. Configure and assign the standard in the Defender portal. Monitor it and view read-only details in the Azure portal. C. Configure the standard in the Azure portal, but assign it in the Defender portal before monitoring it there. D. Configure the standard in the Defender portal, but assign it in the Azure portal before monitoring it there. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Configure and assign the standard in the Azure portal. Monitor it and view read-only details in the Defender portal. The documented responsibility boundary keeps compliance standard configuration and assignment in the Azure portal. The Defender portal focuses on enhanced visualization and compliance progress tracking and provides read-only access to standard details. Question 12. Your organization already receives built-in Microsoft Defender for Cloud recommendations for Azure, AWS, and GCP resources. The security team now wants to define its own assessment logic by creating custom KQL recommendations for all three clouds. Which plan statement is accurate? A. Enable Defender CSPM for the custom KQL capability. Do not extend that prerequisite to every recommendation. B. Enable Defender CSPM everywhere because Defender for Cloud cannot generate any recommendation without that plan. C. Leave plans unchanged because receiving built-in recommendations proves that custom KQL is included as well. D. Wait for a recommendation with a fix button because Quick Fix enables the custom KQL capability. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Enable Defender CSPM for the custom KQL capability. Do not extend that prerequisite to every recommendation. A is correct. The bound documentation makes custom KQL recommendations available across clouds when the Defender CSPM plan is enabled. That prerequisite is specific to the custom KQL capability in this evidence and must not be generalized to every Defender for Cloud recommendation. Question 13. A resource group named RG-Ops has a renderer management lock. A storage account in RG-Ops also has a cannot delete management lock. An engineer with the owner role plans these operations. Update the storage account tags through Azure Resource Manager, delete the storage account through Azure Resource Manager, and delete a blob through the blob service endpoint using valid data plane authorization. Which result should you expect? A. Only the storage account deletion is blocked. The tag update and blob deletion succeed. B. All three operations are blocked because the inherited Regus lock is the most restrictive lock. C. Both Azure Resource Manager operations are blocked. The blob deletion is not blocked by the management locks. D. Only the tag update is blocked. The storage account deletion and blob deletion succeed. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Both Azure Resource Manager operations are blocked. The blob deletion is not blocked by the management locks. The inconsistency lock inherited from RG-Ops is more restrictive than the child cannot delete lock, so it blocks both the control plane update and control plane deletion. Owner permissions do not bypass the applicable lock. Management locks do not protect data plane operations, so the blob deletion is governed by data plane authorization rather than these locks. Question 14. An operations engineer can view access control, IAM, for resource group RG-App. The engineer must assign the Azure built-in reader role to a managed identity at that resource group scope. But add role assignment is unavailable. Which permission must the engineer receive to perform the assignment? A. Microsoft role assignments /read. B. Microsoft Zimmerman /role definitions /write. C. Microsoft assertions /role assignments /write. D. Microsoft.results /subscriptions /resource groups /write. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Microsoft/role assignments/write. Creating an Azure role assignment requires Microsoft/role assignments/write. Being able to view IAM does not prove that the engineer has this write permission. Question 15. An Azure custom role lists Subscription 1 and Subscription 2 in AssignableScopes. An operator has Microsoft Strategic Role Definitions write on Subscription 1, but not on Subscription 2. The operator cannot create the role. You must retain both AssignableScopes. What should you do? A. Grant the operator Microsoft Finer Role Definitions write on both Subscription 1 and Subscription 2. B. Assign the unfinished custom role to the operator at Subscription 1 before creating the role definition. C. Add Microsoft Jacine role definitions right to the custom roles actions collection. D. Assign the operator the Microsoft Entra privileged role administrator role for the tenant. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Grant the operator Microsoft/BCO role definitions/right on both Subscription 1 and Subscription 2. A is correct. For Azure custom role creation, the operator needs Microsoft/Bean role definitions/right on every scope listed in AssignableScopes. Because both subscriptions must remain assignable scopes, the missing definition management permission must be granted on Subscription 2 as well. Question 16. Defender for Cloud identifies an owner assignment for DeployBot at the prod subscription as over-provisioned. A job and usage review establishes all of these facts. DeployBot must keep working. Its required actions are fully covered by a verified job function role. It needs access only to RGApp, and both the current role and current scope are broader than required. Which remediation best enforces least privilege? A. Create an assignment for the verified job function role at RGApp and remove the superseded owner assignment at the prod subscription. B. Create an assignment for the verified job function role at the prod subscription and remove the owner assignment at the prod subscription. C. Create an owner assignment at RGApp and remove the owner assignment at the prod subscription. D. Create an assignment for the verified job function role at RGApp and retain the owner assignment at the prod subscription until the next access review. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Create an assignment for the verified job function role at RG-app and remove the superseded owner assignment at the prod subscription. Because the verified job function role covers the required actions and RG-app is the only required scope, A provides sufficient access at the narrower scope. Removing the owner assignment revokes the broader access, correcting both the excessive role and the excessive scope while preserving required access. Question 17. Contoso protects a recovery services vault by using ResourceGuard Multi-User Authorization, MUA. The vault administrator currently owns the ResourceGuard and has contributor on it. Which change makes MUA provide the intended separation of duties? A. Assign ResourceGuard ownership to a different user and remove contributor, backup MUA admin, and backup MUA operator permissions on ResourceGuard from the vault administrator. B. Keep the vault administrator as ResourceGuard owner, remove contributor, and assign backup MUA operator on ResourceGuard. C. Assign ResourceGuard ownership to a different user and retain contributor on ResourceGuard for the vault administrator. D. Enable soft delete on the vault and keep the current ResourceGuard ownership and permissions. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Assign ResourceGuard ownership to a different user and remove contributor, backup MUA admin, and backup MUA operator permissions on ResourceGuard from the vault administrator. For MUA to function as intended, a different user must own ResourceGuard, and the vault administrator must not hold contributor, backup MUA admin, or backup MUA operator on ResourceGuard. Choice A satisfies both requirements. Question 18. A CI team is standardizing Bicep declarations for sensitive deployment values. A declaration must protect the value from normal logging or display and must comply with a documented secure parameter default rule. Which two declarations meet these requirements? Select two answers. A. @secure param database password string. B. @secure param bootstrap token string equals new guide. C. @secure param API string equals Contoso key 2026. D. param client secret string. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and B. A, @secure param database password string. B, @secure param bootstrap token string equals new guide. A and B are correct. Both parameters use @secure, which prevents normal logging or display of the value. A has no default. B uses the documented new guide exception to the rule against hard-coded defaults for secure parameters. Question 19. Developers must retain permission to create and update Azure resources. However, any create or update that would produce a resource violating a corporate configuration rule must be blocked even when the developer is otherwise authorized. Which control should the company use for this requirement? A, an Azure policy assignment. B, an Azure RBAC role assignment. C, an unassigned custom policy definition. D, an unassigned policy initiative. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A, an Azure policy assignment. Azure policy evaluates the resulting resource against business rules and can block a non-compliant create or update even when the caller has permission to perform the action. Azure RBAC instead focuses on which user actions are allowed at a scope. Question 20. A compliance analyst is reviewing an enabled standard in the Microsoft Defender for Cloud Regulatory Compliance dashboard. A control shows a compliance gap, and the analyst must trace the dashboard evidence to the affected resources and possible remediation actions. Which navigation sequence should the analyst use? A. Open the standard, select an assessment, expand its control, and then use the control to view associated resources and possible remediation actions. B. Open the standard, expand the control, select an associated resource, and then open its assessment to view possible remediation actions. C. Open the standard, expand the control, select an associated assessment, and then view that assessment's resources and possible remediation actions. D. Open the standard, expand the control, select a possible remediation action, and then open its assessment to identify associated resources. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Open the standard, expand the control, select an associated assessment, and then view that assessment's resources and possible remediation actions. Choice C follows the documented dashboard drill down. Within a standard, expand a control to see its associated assessments. Then select an assessment to see its associated resources and possible remediation actions. That sequence preserves the evidence hierarchy needed to investigate the gap. You have completed all 20 questions in SC-500 practice questions, Azure Governance, Policy, and RBAC. Review the distinctions you missed, especially policy scope, security standards, management locks, custom role permissions, RBAC assignments, and recovery safeguards. Thanks for practicing with Web Lizard Lab's CertLab.